Hi everyone, I'm Abby Anna Williams and I'm so excited to be applying to Riley Hospital for Children for the Child Life Internship. So I wanted to start off by talking to you guys about my child life philosophy. So within my future practice of a child life specialist, I really desire to bridge the gap between the patient, family, and medical staff to be able to advocate for culturally competent, gender-affirming, trauma-informed, family-centered care across the child's holistic treatment plan during hospitalization. Using my foundational knowledge of child development, family systems theory, and up-to-date child life evidence-based practice, I really want to individualize therapeutic interventions, treatment plans, and overall healthcare experiences to meet the developmental, sensory, social, and familial needs of each family that enters the hospital. I really aim to champion patients and their families by serving as an integral resource to ultimately combat negative impacts of trauma and hospitalization by utilizing my personal blend of humor, compassion, enthusiasm through tailored psychosocial supports that can impact the entire family system. So going on to talk about one of my practicum experiences, which was at Children's Hospital of Colorado, I had the pleasure of getting to work on the inpatient rehab and orthopedics unit for a whole month. One of the greatest joys of that experience was I got to work really closely with a 13-year-old male patient who was the victim of a motor vehicle accident, which caused him to be quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down, non-vocal, and trach and vent dependent. He was in the hospital for 8 months at that time waiting for at-home nursing support to be available. So the Child Life and I collaborated and created a really unique long-term activity to stimulate his development, to collaborate with the overall multidisciplinary team to make sure there's continuity of care, and find ways to model for the family of how to communicate and build relationships with their son from the way that his body was operating at that point in time. So we created a long-term collage activity. So we would use magazines and have him use his form of communication, which was looking up for yes and down for no, and using a button next to him where he could say, "I have a question." And then we utilized another book that we collaborated with, speech pathology, to learn how to communicate with him through. So he would choose items on the magazine, such as wedding rings, a picture of a father and a son, and we would investigate through using the communication devices what questions he had. So he had questions about if he was ever going to get married, where his dad was, because his dad wasn't at the hospital, and what happened to him in the car accident. And we were able to answer those questions for him, while simultaneously this activity had him meet the Erickson's identity versus role confusion stage, where he was able to explore his identity and his future beliefs and have that abstract thought by utilizing this communication device and this activity. It also let us collaborate with speech pathology, and it let us model for the family who is at bedside how to effectively communicate with their son. And it was so sweet. Throughout the next month, we would walk in and see the family using that communication device to communicate with the son, and seeing the 7-year-old sibling use it to communicate with their brother, and seeing those relationships form and have them build a new family cohesion around how their son operates now. It was so sweet and such a joy. But one of the biggest struggles of being at Children's Hospital of Colorado during my practicum was during my outpatient rotations. I spent 1 week in 4 different outpatient units. And so through that, I would get really just adapt very well into the different environments. So I'd go from cardiac and then to emergency department, and trying to remember all of the different diagnoses and all the different procedures became a little tricky to try to make sure I was remembering all of them and not having them mushed together. So I was able to collaborate with Child Life to learn ways to cohesively and effectively remember those different skills and different procedures. But the most surprising thing was at Children's Hospital Colorado, they have a hospital-wide program called the Adaptive Care Program, where they adapt the hospital whenever a child with a specific developmental need comes in to make sure that they are not triggered or having a negative hospital experience. So they'll provide weighted blankets, they will provide sensory items, they will have sensory rooms available for these kids to make sure that they are coping appropriately with hospitalization. And I loved the hospital's overall initiative to make sure that children with special needs were having their individual needs met. And that's something that I really want to implement into my future practice at whatever hospital I end up at when I become a certified child life specialist. The value of play in the hospital with children is to build rapport. It's a way to normalize the hospital because it's normal play items for them to have a sense of control over what's happening. They can be desensitized to hospital equipment, environment, and it's their way of communicating. So at Children's Hospital Colorado, I implemented an activity in the emergency department with a 5-year-old patient creating jellyfish hospital caps. So I used the hospital surgical caps, and they did googly eyes and had streamers, and then she placed it on her IV pole to desensitize that IV pole and to make it more normalized. Later, she asked me to come bring her more felt and supplies to create fish to go on it, to have an under the water theme. So it desensitized the hospital equipment, it normalized the hospital for her. She was able to use her imaginative play and imaginative brain thinking, just as Piaget talked about, and she was able to, through that, have control over her hospital experience. Thank you guys so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.